Hi, Caroline. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, great to be here.
Amazing. Okay, we're live. So to start the show, I want to give a quick shout out to our amazing sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Varavan. If you're a GP or LP looking to simplify the capital raising and deployment process, Varavan is here to help. Trusted by over 800 funds and managing more than $2 billion in transactions, Varavan offers a secure, streamlined payment platform designed specifically for private capital markets. Say goodbye to manual conciliation and repeated follow-ups. Raise and deploy capital faster and with greater transparency. Ready to make your fund operation smoother? Visit Varen.com, but actually use our bit.ly link down below and see how easy it can be. Okay, so to start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. You have such an amazing career, honestly. Like, yeah, you started your career as a management consultant, and then you have worked at the AI fund, which is Andrew Ng's fund, and then later on, you work at Construct Capital, and now you're a Cowboy Venture. Why don't we talk about what were some? You're basically a career VC at this point. So, what are some core career lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shape you into who you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a couple that come to mind. One is looking for opportunities that provide the highest slope.
Mhm.
Early on in my career, I made decisions that were much less based on brand and logo or money or things like that or title, and we're much more focused on what are the opportunities that I have in this role to learn and what are the gating factors, and essentially chose organizations where in a lot of cases I could bet on myself,
Mhm.
and the opportunity was, the only thing holding me back was my own development or performance, but I could have a very steep learning curve and fast acceleration if I
Mhm.
wanted to. So going to, as an example, a management consulting firm that was more boutique and smaller
Mhm.
allowed me to have way more access to executives at Fortune 100 companies, take on much more responsibility in my early 20s
Mhm.
than I likely would have if I had gone to a larger platform with a little bit more structure and hierarchy and all of that. And so that served me really well. And I've continued in my career to make choices where I prioritized learning
Mhm.
and uh, slope of learning and pace. So I continue to do that and have been happy with that. I think another one is early on, I really understood how much the willingness to work was
Mhm.
a distinct advantage.
Mhm.
And that's not to say that I want to be here as a proponent of hustle culture or anything like that. But the reality is simply being able to really buckle down and do
Mhm.
the work, even if it's not glamorous,
Mhm.
has paid back in spades, and it's so much of how I still work today with
Mhm.
founders. Company building most of the time is not glamorous, and I think the later you go in your career, the easier it is to rely on your past instincts or your gut feel and those sorts of things, and sometimes take shortcuts. And I think the reality is those who are willing to roll up their sleeves, do the work, put in the sheer time, both working smart and hard, are at a distinct advantage. We're seeing that even now in the valley. I think it's coming back a little bit with the prevalence of the 996
Mhm.
or the discussion around it. But I think really it just goes back to the willingness to do the work, and I saw that early on, and how well I saw that work out for others and also for myself, and so that's been a big learning of the past that I've taken forward.
Mhm.
And then I think the last piece that I learned very early on as well is the importance of culture to the
Mhm.
success of an organization. It's can be so easy, particularly in tech, when we're dealing with so many, you know, hard technical concepts, to not think of culture as fluffy.
Mhm.
And the reality is, one of my biggest takeaways is I spent so much time with a variety of different companies at varying stages, was that your culture really isn't what you have up on the wall. It's not what you've put in your documentation or anything like that. It's not what you tell others. What your culture is, it's actually the behaviors that you tolerate each day, that
Mhm.
leadership tolerates, that colleagues tolerate from each other, and that kind of is the true culture of an organization and the standard that's set, and that can be critical in the trajectory of a company early on, but also in the ability of a company much later to adapt and change and be flexible to the organizational changes that happen 20, 30, 50 years. So for the truly foundational companies that want to
Mhm.
change, really want to disrupt industries and those sorts of things, culture is in fact quite important.
For sure. I feel like that's such a I feel like it's a very overlooked segment by most of the startup at the very early stage, just because everyone's in the, like you said, 96 or hustle culture to a degree. So they forgot about like how to actually build a culture that people want to like stay in. Then I think it's very easy to attract people to like jump ship from like a very different environment, whether it's big tech or another startup. But like it's like a lot of it's at the beginnings depending on the product, or like I just chat with the Zeros SVP. So like he said like basically a lot of it depends on like, are you on a winning team? Is your team winning? So I feel like to attract people, that matters a lot. But on the other hand, like to make people stay, maybe you really need to like create something that's sustainable for people to like want to stay and interact with the rest of the team.
Yeah, totally. And for high performance, to create a team that is winning, you need high performance.
Mhm.
And culture is part of a way that you get there.
For sure. I want to maybe dig deeper a little bit before we jump into Cowboy Ventures. As you work at AI Fund, which I'm personally very fascinated by because that's like when I feel like 2018 to 2020 is kind of like I think Andrew was still like it's very popular among like the Stanford PhD program or like the poster sessions and stuff, but it's like it's still fairly indie until like 3 years ago he become like a public figure, like a basically a major influencer at every AI event. So I guess like at the beginning, how do you kind of like discover this thing, and then like what was it kind of look like for you guys to work together on the AI fund, and what are some interesting like observations, whether it's like AI product or AI startup, or like the trends that you are seeing back then versus like compared to today.
Yeah. I had spent some time while I was in consulting, and then when I went back to school at Stanford, in an exploratory phase around AI as a writ large as a technology. And pretty early on got to conviction that at some point it was going to be
Viral.
everywhere. It was going to be universal. And so when I got connected with Andrew, he was and still is a professor at Stanford. He had just left Baidu as chief scientist and was sort of deciding what to do next, and had really similarly strong conviction. The term he liked to use, or the phrase, was AI is the new electricity. This
Mhm.
belief that it will power ultimately everything we do, certainly from a technology perspective. And I really resonated with that, given the work that I had previously done. And so joined while I was still in grad school
Mhm.
as the first employee of the fund. It was quite early, and I think probably in some ways we were establishing what the fund was going to be. It was set up as a startup studio. So in the early days, it was really about being that bridge between highly technical folks in academia, in big tech, who were at the bleeding edge and really understood deeply the technology, but had a very low understanding of what problems existed in the world that their technology would be a good fit for. And then on the other side, you had corporations
Mhm.
who had all sorts of problems, and some of them, some of the forward thinking ones at the time in 2017, 2018, had ideas and thought, AI had a potential to solve their problems, but they had no idea really where the tech was and how the tech could apply and effectively solve their problems. And so we saw ourselves as that bridge to
Mhm.
bringing together and really applying that technology to the problems that were most salient for industry.
Mhm.
So that's how it started. We were doing 0 to 1 investigations into problem spare problem areas and spaces of interest, and then quickly iterating on potential solutions, working with AI technologists, lots of ML engineers, as well as folks in industry to figure out what the opportunities could be. So
I
that's what we spent time doing.
I have so many questions there. It's just because, like, I think logistically, like, how, like, do you talk to the engineer first and then got a grasp of like I mean, Andrew himself is like um, I think he like definitely have a lot of understanding on where the research side of things is going. So I don't think that you need to like do major customer
Yeah.
service to the engineer to like understand what's going on. But I guess like how when like the big companies like I feel like the to turning like a cutting edge research into like an actual tech product is very hard. And how do you guys kind of like work with the Fortune 500? Because obviously you have great experience as like working in the consulting space to like
Mhm.
Fortune 100 companies, but I guess like how do you kind of like listen to their opinion and then actually find the solution? Because um I just find it, like, very difficult for, like, a big company to adopt anything that's just new. They kind of
Mhm.
need some sort of traction than an existing product. I feel like people are more comfortable of acquiring a solution than a piece of technology. So how do you guys
Yeah.
kind of think about partnering them up? What is the kind of, like, thing or, like, the, I guess, like, the incubation kinda look like? Is it, like, me pairing you up with the CEO of Walmart, and then you make
Right.
something for me at Walmart? Or how does that kind of work?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a good question, and that level of friction still exists today in some senses as well, despite much more exposure to AI. But I will put you and the audience back in the world of 2017,
Mhm,
2018, when the Transformers paper had just come out.
mhm,
So that paper was 2017. BERT was the big thing from a model perspective, and so we were definitely in a different age of AI at
mhm,
that time, and so there was even less visibility and understanding of the technology and what it could do.
mhm,
In terms of how the process operated, and I think some of the things just on product development and understanding that over time and we really learned was how important it is to start with a relatively narrow and high value job to be done.
mhm,
And what it doesn't look like is asking the Fortune 500 company, what do you need or what do you want?
mhm,
It's much more about going deep into the use cases that are required and understanding each step of a task, and
mhm,
then how those each of those tasks comes together to make an entire workflow.
mm,
So it is very, very specific to the detail of the task and the workflow and breaking that down into smaller pieces. And it was very experiential. So, as an example, I spent some time in the call center space,
mhm,
which is quite popular now as well with the Sierras and Decagons of the world. And I flew to Guatemala and spent time with an outsourced call center of one of our customers there.
mhm,
And it was truly sitting and watching the exact flow
mhm,
of what they were doing And not only that, but what decisions that they were making, what reasoning they were going through to make the decisions that then led to actions in their tasks and workflows.
Mhm.
And so we would break that down and then try to productize pieces of that and figure out how we could essentially code that logic and that decision making into the product.
Mhm.
So a lot of focus there on breaking it down into those tasks. I think, co-creating with users was very important. And so really embedding with design partners and measuring task specific level deltas and having really strong focus on the ROI,
Mhm.
not the vanity metrics, but really the ROI product metrics were important on usage, on precision and performance, et cetera. I
Mhm.
would say for dealing with those level of customers in particular or design partners, there were a couple of things that were really important. One was a human in the loop design for us back then. So having that level of involvement and still today in reality, a lot of the early iterations, excuse me, or deployments of a product have a human in the loop.
Mhm.
And that was important for adoption.
Mhm.
And then secondarily was security, uh,
Mhm.
particularly around data.
Mhm.
And so managing that data accordingly, making sure that they knew how we were using that data, and and then giving them an understanding of how the data was used because it felt very black box. So the more that we could build in explainability into the products that we were building, the more confidence that they had early on to be able to adopt the product.
For sure. I think that's super interesting. I feel like you kind of like went through the entire product cycle to like build, I guess, like help incubate these different companies. Maybe we could talk about the transition into being an investor at Construct Capital to maybe we could also cover, I guess, Cowboy Ventures because I think you guys kind of like coined the term unicorn. Maybe we could start with like Cowboy Ventures if that you feel like it's like a more since I feel like that's more recent, or maybe if you want to talk about since I feel like you've spent 4 years, which is like basically college years at Construct Capital. Uh,
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll first talk a little bit about the transition to venture. So what was interesting about working at a studio was I had one foot in the building and
mhm,
then one foot in the investing because we were deploying capital towards the companies that we felt had
mhm,
the most likelihood of success and that we had the most conviction around. And so part of my hat, I got to be a 0 to 1 builder again and again,
mhm,
and experience the joy and the pain, the trials and the tribulations of figuring out an early product and customer discovery and all of that, while also looking at the broader market and business opportunity and scalability of these companies and products. So I invested. We had a $185 million fund at the time, and so we invested that into a lot of the companies that we set in. And I think after several years of being deep in the weeds of AI product building, I was excited to take AI, and I think this is largely true today. So much has changed, but almost nothing has changed, which is the sense that AI is a tool. It
mhm,
is a technology at our disposal. It's not a reason for a company to exist, except there are very rare cases where fundamentally a company is a research-based company that is solely moving forward the research and the technology.
mhm,
And we've certainly seen some of those come about to great success, but the vast majority of companies are solving a real business need and a customer pain point or problem. And
mhm,
the way that they can use that is quite diverse. They can innovate on UI or business model. They can innovate on the technology, but there are lots of different ways to innovate and solve that problem. AI is one of those tools and a very strong one. And so I wanted to open the aperture and use that as one of the tools of many at our disposal here in the Valley and beyond to move product forward and move industries forward. And so that took me to pure investing, which I have, been doing now for the better part of the last decade. At Cowboy, we are seed stage focused. So we have been around for about 13 years. We're on our fourth fund, and we are generalist from a segments perspective, but very focused on seed as a stage, on that early discovery, all of the messy parts of defining and validating product market fit, moving towards go to market fit and setting up the foundation of a company to scale. So that's what's most exciting for us. We work across classic, applied AI, both vertical and horizontal. We spend a lot of time in security, dev tools, fintech. My partner Aileen also is a great consumer investor. So she actually just posted something today on next gen consumer AI and what we can expect in the next 5 to 10 years in that wave. So that's where we focus. I think our approach is quite differentiated in our boutique style. We are very hands-on. We don't invest in that many companies in any given year. The ones that we do, we really roll up our sleeves and support and work side by side with. And our lens is we are in service of the founders that we invest in and that we have the privilege to back. And so we find scrappy ways to do that as a small team. So that's us at Cowboy, and we've been spending a lot of time in a lot of these areas that we've discussed already and are looking forward to investing in many more over the next couple of years.
For sure. I wonder when it comes to maybe we could start with since you guys are more on the general side or the general C stage, I guess, maybe we could talk about the trends that you're seeing that's interesting to you, and then maybe the other part is how does the portfolio construction look like, since I feel it seems like you guys have two funds, one is 140 million focused on C stage, and then there's the Mustang fund for 120 mil. Maybe we could talk about how do you even select about the breakout portfolio companies, and then how does that kind of influence the funds return perspective on the earlier stage fund as well. So maybe we can start with the sector, segment, and check size. Then then we'll move forward to the part.
Yeah, sure. So check size wise, we're typically 1 to 4 million as a check size. And from an areas of interest perspective, this is very top of mind because I just had dinner last night with 10 brilliant ML researchers and operators. So I'm definitely buzzing from a lot of new thoughts and inspiration from that. I think the reality is we are probably in a situation right now where we have overhyped and overestimated the ability or impact of AI in the near term, but perhaps underestimated it in the long term. So there's a little bit of a disconnect, which we often see with new technologies and adoption of new technologies. But there are a lot of quality, scaling, and adoption challenges that are still to be solved in AI broadly, specifically in agentic workflows. And those are some of the areas that we're particularly excited about and focused on right now. So on the tech side, or the more technical side of things, I think, a lot of the areas we've been thinking about are what are the protocols or standards going to be moving forward for agent to agent communication? What is that going to look like? What are the validation of that going to look like?
Mhm.
We have MCP as a potential. Anthropic has put out their view of what that is going to be, but are there going to be others, and how will that unfold? Ultimately, there's a lot of talk now about how most agents over the next couple of years, at least in the near term, are going to be natural language focused because they have to interact with both agents and humans. So in what time frame is that going to evolve? So
Mhm.
we're spending a lot of time there. We're thinking about model performance. So things like evals and determinism for faster model improvement. That's been quite top of mind as we're seeing some of the limits of performance and accuracy, again, especially within agents.
Mhm.
And then I would say the other big piece is data access and monetization challenges. So Cloudflare has pay per crawl, and I was
Mhm.
chatting with them recently about that. Reddit and others have obviously worked out their own standalone agreements in terms with the large language companies on access to data. There are companies like there's a Series A startup Protege, which acts kind of as a marketplace for training data, but it's very unclear where all of the massive content that's being created on the web that right now is feeding the data sources of these foundation models
Mhm.
over time, if and how that is going to be monetized, protected, used. And we're still in the very early days of that.
Mhm.
Some of the other areas of interest are security, obviously. As
Mhm.
I talk with a lot of operators, I was at another dinner with 30 operators talking all about agentic commerce,
Mhm.
and the buzzword of the night was trust.
Mhm.
And all of these operators were talking about their concerns and hesitations around full implementation of agents for a variety of different workflows because of a lack of trust.
Mhm.
And part of that trust, I divide that trust into two categories.
Mhm.
One is a security related trust. So,
Mhm.
trust in terms of data level security, fraud, etc. And then the second piece of trust is actually trust in quality of output.
Mhm.
So someone's giving me a recommendation. How much do I trust that recommendation? And trust the taste or the decision making of that if it's in the case of commerce. And so we have those two pillars of trust that still have not been worked out yet, and that are some of the biggest frictions in the largest enterprises, how they're trying to figure out their applications and uses of AI. So those are a couple of the areas. There are many more. What's most exciting, I think, about the time that we're in from an investing perspective is there's such a long list of what needs to be done to truly reach the AI future that I think we all envision. But those are a couple of the areas that we're digging particularly deep on the technical side of things. And then I would say more generally, more at the applied layer is a lot on vertical solutions where the underlying tech is important, but ultimately will not be the moat over time. And the
Mhm.
moat and the defensibility and a reason to win for companies is much more focused on specific workflows, delightful customer experience, really high quality product development that is created, and there are vertical specific opportunities there where whether it's workflow, whether it's data, um, and usability, there are reasons for a vertical solution to win. And those vertical solutions will hopefully create net new data sets, proprietary data sets, and learning loops from user behavior that then create ongoing defensibility. So those are some of the areas that we're excited about and eager to learn more about and chat to founders about.
For sure. Okay, so I want to unpack, like, maybe if we could unpack a little bit more on like the eval side. So like any particular like application that you're seeing that's like really interesting in that kind of like domain,
In which domain?
like eval.
Oh, in evals. So right now, from an eval perspective, there are so many companies that are trying to do evals externally
Mhm.
and be kind of a platform for evals. And it's not entirely clear that will work,
Mhm.
and that evals won't, because there is an element of taste to evals, that evals won't just be ultimately relatively customized to an organization, where that team, that company will have to have a team and someone who is responsible for managing and creating those evals over time.
Mhm.
So we've seen a lot early trying to productize evals, but I think it remains to be seen the success and scalability of that. There's also been a fair amount of work on reinforcement learning and the overlap of that in this space as well. Lots of, again, from a lot of my conversations with ML researchers and leaders, what uh, what once was a maligned category,
Mhm.
reinforcement learning has come back with a vengeance, and for certain use cases may be particularly useful and valuable as well, but it's still so early. It's truly an active research area right now. So there's more to do there, but I think I'm optimistic that there will be some innovation happening there as well that will be helpful.
For sure. I wonder, in terms of like trust, I feel like the other day I was like, since you mentioned about like commerce enablement as a space in the AI space. So the other day I was looking at the basically agent stripe solution. So like
Mhm.
actually it's like you are enabling the agent to access your like transaction layer for different companies. Like what's your observation in that space? Like, so for example, commerce enablement, you mentioned trust is like a big thing. What are people innovating to like maybe enable, I guess, either like agent or any other kind of like technology to kind of like enable people to shop in the new, I guess, like AI native era?
Mhm. Mhm. A lot of it is right now about breaking up the tasks themselves. So different agents that have strengths in different things. So, as an example, if you want to purchase something,
Mhm.
what as a human, if a human was going to purchase that, if you had your own personal assistant, what would they do? They'd probably go and do a bunch of research, they'd collect information, they'd understand what your priorities are in terms of that purchase. So, what are the bounds that they're triangulating against? Price, quality, speed to delivery, performance, all of that sort of thing. So they would understand those bounds and solicit that. They would understand what's out there and get, research the market. And then they'd make the decision and then finally actually execute on that decision and take the action. And what we're seeing a lot of now is work in the first part or upstream
Mhm.
tasks of that whole decision of a purchase. So, helping with better discovery and exploration, better comparison and decision making. And so, a lot of the agents are focused there where there is not as high of a burden for
Mhm.
that trust.
Mhm.
And so they're focusing there with the hope that and the plan to eventually move to more action-oriented behaviors to complete the loop.
Mhm.
But right now, most of it is upstream. Let me cut the time and reduce the time and mental load that's required to do the research, discovery, comparison, and then ultimately help you get to a decision faster.
For sure. I wonder what's your thought on like FIA or equivalent of that kind of like, shopping experience. So like it help you since you mentioned about like comparison between like prices and stuff, I would assume. And then also like I feel like the future of shopping, it seems like a lot of people are very bullish about like the search or like the kind of like chat experience. So obviously like Elta, which is like another like fashion company that's just like doing, I feel like it's kind of like from my experience, I define it as like a chat GPT for shopping. Like
Mhm.
type in, hey, I'm like going to blah 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 event, generate me an outfit. Or like, I upload a bunch of stuff from my closet to be like, hey, let's just like put something together. But how do you think about like the future of like ads as well? Since people are probably gonna um not rely on Google gave you like a list of product, but rely on a ChatGPT to give you a list of product. Is there going to be different algorithms to like rank high on search, or do you feel like it's kind of very similar to the Google model, that everybody just buys some sort of search word on ChatGPT to rank themselves higher?
Mhm. Mhm. It is it is it remains to be seen,
Mhm,
and it's definitely very top of mind for brands in particular, as you mentioned. I think the era of SEO that everyone knew and at least understood
mhm,
is going to entirely change as the front door, that discovery mechanism,
mhm,
for discovery and search will likely change quite a bit.
mhm,
From an advertising perspective and a visibility perspective,
mhm,
ultimately, I do think there will be a similar setup where there will be some sort of monetization or marketplace for representation in search results
mhm,
in our new version of search. More broadly, within discovery, it will, I think, likely push towards other ways to engage users, whether that's content or other things. You will no longer be able to simply search and have confidence that your brand is going to be elevated. So understanding how you can influence the consumer at other before the decision point, particularly, I think brand will become in a lot of ways more important, and you'll have kind of a barbelling approach, as
mhm,
we've seen in the past with commerce as well, where you kind of have the Amazon basics, and it's very replaceable. You're looking for something there where brand is not high value. And so we'll continue to see more of that and commodification of certain categories. And then otherwise, brand will be more important,
mhm,
and kind of the higher end luxury, et cetera, because you will be making that decision much more based on what the brand says about you and who you are and your vision or values or lifestyle or any of that. So I think it's going to be particularly challenging for the middle of the road brands
mhm.
to access consumers in the way that they have previously. So it very much remains to be seen. I think a lot of the model companies are still largely trying to figure this out. Vertical domain specific have more of a clear model forward from a ranking perspective because they can simply do it based on interest levels and match with relative criteria.
Mhm,
But if they monetize, the question is, what do consumers think about that?
mhm,
Right now, what's being surfaced is more understandable, and you've got a whole page of Google results
mhm,
as an example. But typically, in more of these new applications, what we're seeing is, top 3, top 5. So there's much more narrow of a set of focus, and so it will be between those platforms and brands to ultimately determine how that's monetized and if it's monetized, because there will be questions from consumers for sure as well.
for sure.
All that to say, I don't know, but it's an active area of exploration. But I think we're just too early to really see how it's gonna to play out.
For sure. I wonder, since you guys write like $1 to $4 million checks, I feel like a lot of the company that you guys invest in are both, there's like, obviously consumer company like Dollar Shave Club, or there is I guess like education company, or Drata, which is like a compliance company, like how do you think about spending your time on the early stage landscape when it comes to, I know you guys invest in fintech, obviously, and then there's like, other sub-segment. Like, how do you think about like, spending your time on dev tools or fintech or consumer? Like, how do you kind of like map out the important companies in your own mental roadmap? And is there anything that you feel like, based off your, since you have seen a lot of companies, like what are some subcategory that you personally feel like is very important but very overlooked by the venture community, and what are some stuff that you feel like are kind of like overhyped? Because I feel like there's so many dev tools. Like, so when I was doing research for my own like 100 like smart AI 100 list, which um I feel like I saw one of the biggest finding is like actually the dev tool space is like one of the most popular space where VC is pouring money into. Just as
Mhm.
also understandable, as like I feel like every AI developer is like developing AI tool for themselves to a degree. So, and then some of them just like end up to be a very popular tool. But um what's your thought on these kind of like industry that's like overly built but underinvested, or like, vice versa?
Yep. So I would agree with you. I think right now there's been such a proliferation of
Mhm,
dev tools, and tooling in the space, and things are moving really quickly. And so it's also very difficult, particularly at the early stage, to have an effective map out of which of these tools is fundamentally going to matter
mhm,
in even the midterm.
mhm,
And I would say I think part of that is because the narrative of picks and shovels is so compelling
mhm,
to VCs at large. They love the idea of a picks and shovels play that can work across an entire set, and particularly when we see a technology shift like we're seeing right now, picks and shovels plays feel safer in a lot of minds, I think. But the reality is it's been relatively over invested in. They can be very hard to monetize. There's a lot of competition from open source, and you also see a fair number of open source companies that are funded and move towards monetization, but that's a hard road.
mhm,
So I do think there's been a lot of time and money spent there and probably overinvested there. The areas that I am excited about right now, particularly at the application layer, are in more foundational spaces. So the legacy industries that are sneaky, massive TAMs, but are problems that your average founder or VC probably doesn't have that much
mhm,
exposure to and doesn't know that much about.
mhm,
But the reality is they're massive and totally underserved today by technology.
mhm,
Many of these companies have barely digitized,
mhm,
and they're just thinking through data storage and getting a data lake, let alone doing sophisticated AI applications or modeling and usage of that data. And so those are the areas where I think there's a ton of tech unlock potential and relatively few dollars invested
mhm,
as compared to the market cap of the incumbents in that space, and the impact that those industries have on US GDP, as an example. So that's where I'm really excited about and continue to double down on. I
mhm,
would say the other thing we're seeing more generally within VC is just a lot of attempts at kingmaking,
mhm,
and a feeling that it's better to be a consensus investor than it is a non-consensus investor. And so what meant practically is massive amounts of dollars flowing into very few companies that typically are trying to be the horizontal application winner in a particular space. So in legal, in healthcare.
mhm,
And the reality is that a lot of those horizontal plays are useful in a lot of cases, but don't necessarily have the specificity or the workflow usage to effectively serve customers in kind of that longer tail, which is actually quite large. So I think that's where some of the vertical applications are more compelling as well. One space that I think is both in some ways overhyped and overinvested in, and yet still has not, we haven't gotten the right solution, is in security.
Mhm.
We have seen so much money pour in. There have been lots of interesting acquisitions in the security space. But the reality, if you talk to most CISOs, is that they still don't understand or have a handle on how they're going to manage security in the age of AI, and whether or not legacy tooling in that space, and legacy, really not just tooling, but legacy approaches in that space are going to hold up as compared to new and novel ways to think about security in the AI and agentic world.
I have so many questions there. Like one thing is like I think what you said is such an interesting point. It's like I think the industry really just can make one or two company that in a particular category, and then the rest are like dead basically. And like whenever as an angel investor, sometimes I get sent like later stage investor, like a company that I'm like very excited about, but they're like, hey, A and Z just invest in, no offense to A and Z, but obviously they're great investors, but they just invest in like a competitor. So we're like not really looking at this thing. So um I guess like how do you kind of like maintain a sense of like just like being able to think for yourself? And then sometimes it is kind of like risky to invest in a company that's kind of like everybody invests in like a different company in that category. But even that even I'm personally a product user of this company that's like competing with every like VC firm invests in like or like every VC firm is like raving about their competitor every single day. I don't want to name names, but on our conference, I basically publicly said I like side with this other company. But I guess like the thing is like it's very difficult because of like that they're gonna win in the fundraising arena because of like everybody else are like trying to get into the deal. But on the other hand, there's like way better product in like somewhere else.
Mhm.
Maybe distribution is like kind of like lack of help at the moment, or but I think like you never really know to like who's gonna actually succeed. How like what are something that you would be willing to take the risk to bet on something that like people didn't really bet on? And then what are some risks that you are not really willing to take in that category?
Yeah, yeah. It's not an exact science by any means, but I do think that so much of a part of this job is maintaining your own
Mhm.
conviction and your own sense of evaluation for companies. Otherwise, it's very hard to find alpha in spaces. So that's hard, but an ongoing project. What I always find is the most helpful is getting first party data.
Mhm.
So going to customers who use some of the incumbents, but also the tech challengers to incumbents that have been massively funded and in some cases overfunded, and talking to their customers and their users about the product and what the experience is like, and if it's serving their needs, and
Mhm.
uh, to what extent it is doing that. And that's a really good way to sniff out which of these companies are truly performing
Mhm.
and which of them are simply well funded. Over history, there have been plenty of companies that have been very, very well funded and have gone to zero,
Mhm.
or just simply have not become enduring businesses. There have been many instances. I think the one that's recent is sort of the Lacework Wiz example. We think about that in some of our existing portfolio companies as well, where we've backed a competitor to a company that is already relatively well funded, may have certainly better name recognition.
Mhm.
But when you go to the product and the product velocity and iteration of the team and their ability to execute, it is clear that there's still an opportunity for them to win. Because this is not the case in all categories. In some categories, the best product doesn't win out, but in a lot of categories, ultimately, that strong product will win if executed, if the business is executed correctly. So that's what we really focus on, is getting the first party data and not going off of the funding cycle hype or, the celebratory blog posts or any of that sort of stuff. Just talk with the customers, talk with those who are evaluating the different tools. It's a really good sign when you have an early stage startup that is beating out one of those well-funded competitors, and not even on price, but just on performance and quality of the product. So that's something that we really look for to mitigate the risk in some sense. And I think the reality for a lot of these markets too is they're not winner take all, and there will be at least multiple winners in core categories, which also gives more opportunity as well.
I have a question on the data part. Like, what kind of data do you think it's useful? Like, since you mentioned first party data, like one thing is like talking to the customer. What would be the question that you ask them? It's like, hey, have you used Uber versus Lyft? And then like, there's no product difference. No offense to anyone, but I just literally feel like, oh, if there's no car on this app, I'll just go to this app. I don't think it's like a very major life threatening like differences between these two products. So how do you kind of like differentiate them, or like what are some like core benchmark that you're like very bullish about?
Yeah.
What are some questions that you like actually ask people?
Yes. Well, so I think you make an excellent point, which also comes down to what the product is that you're really offering and the relative importance and impact of that experience. So at the end of the day, if they get you safely from A to B in a reasonable amount of time in some sort of price window, you kind of don't care who you use. I think when you talk about B2B and enterprise products, you get much more into other factors, which are things like onboarding and interoperability with other systems and maintenance and support and historical legacy in the organization from a UI perspective. It is a large hurdle, maybe said a better way. It's a large hurdle to rip and replace something in many cases. If there is a totally different UI, if it requires different integrations, if you have built up your proprietary data in a particular system. And so I think that is where, when you look at some of the companies where they have more stickiness, some of it simply comes from better product, better UI, and delivery, but some of it certainly also comes from who was first, was able to integrate successfully, and has now created hooks or stickiness that make it very difficult to switch and have raised the switching costs. In terms of what to ask the customers, it tends to be very focused. Again, you never want to ask a customer just, what do you think of it? It's a lot more of, okay, tell me how you use it. Tell me when you were considering buying it, what else was in your consideration set? How did you compare it with these 4 other things? Did you consider building versus buying? How often do you use it? Who uses it? How hard was it to use? Do you feel like you're getting, 100% of the product value? All of those sorts of things are really beneficial. Do you trust it? There's some of the classic questions of, if you didn't have it, how sad would you be? If you had a replacement, et cetera, how unfortunate would that be for you? How much more would you pay for it if the pricing was increasing? Would you continue to pay a premium because it's that valuable? for you to keep it. And so all of those sorts of things are very helpful to suss out. We're in such a time of experimentation right now with AI tools that I think a lot of it too, you can simply look at the retention or churn numbers. So quality of revenue is such an important metric these days because most companies have some sort of budget for experimentation with AI. But they have a high bar for what tools they will continue to use over time. And so seeing what the renewal percentages are is a good indication of, the early value of that product to the customer.
I have a question on this. So, for example, if you're evaluating it, like I think, like you mentioned, like the enterprise side, there's like a lot of the integration, or just like how easy it is to use, or like the product
Mhm.
cycle or whatever. Like, but for consumers, as you guys are also kind of like consumer experts as well, how do you think about stuff like, if I'm like building a music startup, like I personally don't play that many music. I mean, I learned like piano as a 5, but like I
Mhm.
don't never really touched the piano since in the
Yeah.
past years. So like I guess like for these kind of like consumer product, obviously you can try, but like I'm not like the most enthusiastic person to use something like that. Like how do you kind of like evaluate based off the different things? Or like, back in time when I was working in venture, I feel like when I first entered the space, like, I was looking at the Bible app, right? So like, in that space, people think it's a niche space, but it's like very, very profitable. It could be. So I guess like how do you evaluate these kind of subsector that's kind of niche, but also like, when people give you like a customer usage benchmark, like how do you know if the retention is high or low? Maybe the entire category have like a very high retention in general. Like everybody
Mhm.
like, let's say this piano app 10 times because they're trying
Yeah.
to song, and your usage is 70%, like your retention is 70%, but it's actually lower than like
Yeah.
traditional one, maybe it's 80% or something.
Yeah.
We kind of like quickly find out the benchmark compared to the different industries.
Yeah. Regardless, I mean, I am more of an enterprise investor, but I would say regardless, with those types of benchmarks, we see it in a lot of different cases. The beauty of being in venture is you see a lot of them, and although every company, believes that they're a special snowflake and has, a new idea, you do tend to see ideas come in waves where all of a sudden there are 10 companies that are sort of going after the same space. And so that is one aspect of it, where simply doing this job and doing this job for a long time, you get a sense of those benchmarks. Some of it is scrappily being able to understand and find out what the incumbents are doing and working backwards from there. I think what makes consumer so challenging for a lot of folks is that sense that it's really easy to personalize to you as an investor and what your opinion would be, and your opinion is not necessarily the opinion of a broader market. And so understanding and trying to find data that's from a much wider swath or that direct ICP is important as well, to not overly personalize it when making those types of determinations. But I think for benchmarks, it's really a lot of it is being in the thick of it and seeing a ton of companies and then being able to successfully get information from the incumbents as well.
Mm, for sure. Okay, so I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we wrap with a 1 minute fire run.
Okay.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book is, oh my gosh, I would say probably is Catherine Graham's autobiography.
Uh, Nice. So I think she's the owner of Washington Post.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting person. I actually read about her in Warren Buffett's biography.
Mhm. Yes, they had a good, yeah.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to my dinner party? I would probably invite a mix of the founders of the US, so the writers of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, because I think the US democracy is truly incredible. And then Oprah, and I'd probably have to have Taylor Swift in there,
Wow.
some scientists, yeah, and then
Yes,
yeah.
of course. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
The biggest impact on my career is a very interesting one. I would say the biggest impact on my career probably as of now have been the portfolio company CEOs that I've worked with, because they have taught me so much, have been the reason that, I've learned what I have, and have been kind of the comrade in arms in building things, and ultimately are the folks that have been most inspiring to me to kind of keep doing this job.
For sure. Wait, where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, I am likely hiking or doing Pilates,
Mhm.
or spending time with friends in any and everywhere, but laughing.
Love that. Well, anyway, Caroline, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much, Grace. This was super fun.
Let me quickly